Thank you very much, everybody. For those of you who are here for the previous talk, you heard my good friend Paul speak eloquently, without hesitation, deviation, or repetition, on the high-level themes of the Internet of Things. My presentation builds on that, but gets somewhat more geeky, because as most of you know, I am sad and geeky. That's what I do. And I want to talk about the fact that these things, they're not products. You should be thinking of them as risks in a box, which builds nicely on what Paul is saying. And I shall explain why. And it's not all doom and gloom. Those of you who remember me speaking 2 years ago, who gave a fairly doom-laden presentation. However, I feel totally justified in standing here and saying I told you so. Because I think there's only one thing in that presentation I predicted that hasn't yet happened, and that's just a matter of time. So I'm going to, a quick introduction. Why is it a problem? Some examples of some of the technical risks that we face. Why are there these market pressures on security? Why should we be doing things to be secure by design and default? What incentives are there for the manufacturers, the kind of regulations? And then I build a bit on what possibly we can do about it, things that we can do in this kind of space. As Jill kindly pointed out, I am head of IoT security capability. I'm based at our Technology and Innovation Centre on the edge of Cambridge, where myself and a whole bunch of other technical people spend time playing with stuff like this, taking it apart, figuring out why it does and does not work, and also in some cases actually designing this kind of capability for other people. One of the reasons I can speak about this stuff is we do actually design prototype IoT equipment for various organisations. So I speak from bitter experience in some cases. Without further ado, there are these various concepts that people that people are looking to do. They're looking to improve efficiency. They're looking for new services, new business models. It's that classic management mantra of I want everything faster, better, and cheaper. But what they're not saying, as Paul said, is, oh, and it needs to be at least as secure as the last lot was, if not more so. In many cases, a lot more so. And people are introducing industrial IoT to improve things like remote asset management, in some cases just to keep track of where things are. We did some work for an organisation. They have some very, very expensive pieces of kit that get moved around a large industrial site, and just keeping track of where they are is actually quite a challenge. They want to do predictive maintenance. They want to reduce the amount of downtime. They want to know when does something actually need servicing. They want real-time analytics to help their employees make better decisions. How do we make sweat the assets as best as possible? And they want to automate repetitive and predictable tasks. Can we get the robot to do it? If I had one of the cobots that Paul talked about, it'd spend most of its time making me cups of tea, I think. But people are also using this stuff now to start understanding how their customers use their products. And this is that back we talk about data analytics. People actually taking your data and making use of it. And of course, they want to use this to add additional services and, quotes, deepen their relationships with their customers, which most roughly translates as make more money from you. But why is it such a problem? Isn't it a bit late when we've already got something like 23 billion of these things out there in the field in use? And the vast majority, they're not secure. They leak data. They have little or no privacy. They cannot be patched, which to my mind means very poor, if non-existent, asset management. They don't have strong authentication of the user or the device. We're back to that single password. And they don't support strong encryption at data or in rest. And the point Paul made about chips, because we're doing design work, I can tell you that if I want a chip that supports elliptic curve or AES-256, it's going to cost me $5 per chip more than one that doesn't. And in many cases, as you said, it's unit cost. It's down to unit cost. People are not prepared to pay the money. We have had people coming to us wanting us to design an IoT device, and when we've got to the bit about security requirements, what do you want to do? Oh, nothing, because that's going to add to the cost. Development time, price of the parts, support, and everything else. Don't put any security in it. We just want this quick and dirty. And then we have things like shared code libraries. I'll talk more about that slightly later on. They are dependent upon a service from a vendor. Quite often they have default admin passwords set. They use cloud backends. I know Paul talked very eloquently about how you can make cloud secure. That's great if somebody actually understands what they're doing. I did an examination of a particular service last week that's using cloud. They had put their registration authority and certification authority key pairs for their entire PKI infrastructure in an Amazon S3 bucket with no encryption of any sort around them to protect them. Yeah, I know. I needed a cup of tea at that point. They're using third-party support and they are connecting IoT to ICS SCADA in increasing numbers. And of course now we've got Shodan and Autosploit, which effectively IoT for script kiddies. It is so much easier now to find and compromise this kind of stuff. It really is getting absolutely frightening, the things that you can do now. And the end result is that you get security on your budget if you're lucky. This is a phrase that I have used several times. Some of you may have seen it in various blogs or articles that I've written. In the race to the bottom, time taken to get a new product to the market, the drive to minimize cost, the first casualty is often security. And also the amount of assurance testing performed. We had a product in our offices earlier this year. It had been through CTAS testing. We put it into our test reg. We found 3 problems that CTAS had missed. Also, you get lots of these devices. The Mirai botnet, a lot of it was DVRs. Again, just default passwords. And also, some of this time, they're not looking at all about security properly. There's this great paper, Clear Text Data Transmissions in Consumer IoT Medical Devices. As you can see, packets of data sent in the clear can be trivially intercepted. It is trivial to recover the original content using a limited number of widely available compression algorithms. Transmitting application data in the clear is prevalent amongst IoT devices. This is just about the medical stuff, but the same is true in most of the other appliances that you can buy. It is not difficult to plug them in and actually read the traffic. It doesn't take long to figure it out. And of course, that's particularly worrying because of increasing moves to telehealthcare, where you have some kind of sensor at home, you plug it in, and the hospital can monitor you remotely, either for a consultation or just on a day-to-day basis. And when you add that to the cloud storage that people are using for commercial offerings, you have the potential, because they are not doing security properly, for a wide-scale breach of privacy, of personal data, and all sorts of embarrassment. Here's a great piece of report. Digital Shadows were kind enough to allow me to quote from this. It's a report that they put together. We found over 12 petabytes of data in Amazon S3 buckets, SMB, FTP, misconfigured servers, NAS drives. Third parties and contractors were the most common sources of sensitive data exposure. What are people doing these days? They're outsourcing to third parties and contractors, aren't they? Driving down the cost. But these people don't have the same motivation to care about your data that you do. Even if you have got it right in the contract that exists between you. We all audit our suppliers, don't we, to make sure they're compliant with what we're doing? Yes, Dave. Yeah. Oh, and there's that point I was making. People are doing this kind of thing. They are not thinking about what they're putting into these kind of containers. The problem is, you have these huge number of devices, and they require security solutions that scale well. When I did the UK smart metering program, we were talking about 600 million digital certificates across 23 million devices. If you think about the kind of the number of sensors that are being rolled out, the fact we've got 23 billion devices, What if you're trying to manage 500 or 600 million devices? What if you have a sensor network that covers, say, the UK road network? How many sensors are you going to need? You know, the kind of speed sensors that they have, movement sensors, sensors for fog and all sorts of other things. You start putting those into IoT, linking those together. How are you going to manage all this stuff? Especially when in that kind of environment, it's probably got a lifespan of over 20 years. Some of these things, you just put them in place. And many of them allow third-party use as well. How do I produce some kind of PKI system that allows third parties to actually interact with me and authenticate? It can be done, but there's a huge amount of complex paperwork to be done. What are the chances of getting it right? Are companies going to be prepared to put enough effort into designing something like this that works properly and actually maintaining it and driving it the way it should be? This in itself brings another element of risk into the process, because doing this can give you the security you need, but it's complex. Then we have the issue of personalization, identity and firmware. If you think every single one of you in your pocket right now has got a piece of personalized data, if not two pieces, a chip and PIN card, probably got a debit card and a credit card, yeah? How does the bank get your personal data onto that card without anybody else finding it out? Yeah? They've got good processes for doing it. The same kind of thing needs to be done for IoT devices. How do I, if I've got a personal health checker or a piece of one of these telematics boxes in my car for insurance purposes, how does that box get configured in such a way that it's personal to me and the data from it only goes back to my insurance company? How do I do that properly? There are techniques for it. How do I burn the keys into it? What kind of keys do I need? And again, this comes back to what chips am I going to use? Can I get the right kind of chips? Fortunately, it's getting easy to do, but even so, they cost more money because they're more complex. Are people prepared to spend that kind of money? Now, there are great techniques, and there's a company called Secure Things that's doing great work in this space. I'm really pleased with the work they're doing. So there are ways of doing this. As I said, this isn't all doom and gloom, but you need to think about it. If you're going to put together this kind of system that's going to roll out stuff on a large scale, you need to think about how you're going to personalize, deploy, and configure these boxes before they go out the door. Then you've got the issues about how do I protect the code on them? How do I make sure that the thing boots properly? So you have a first stage bootloader that whoever's made the chip will have put in place, your own second stage bootloader, but what you need is some kind of key that will unlock and check the second stage bootloader to make sure it hasn't been corrupted. That in turn unlocks your firmware, your operating system, and that in turn unlocks the device settings. We work with some people who've made some devices. It has all sorts of optional extra functions that it can do. You don't want people buying about 30 or 40,000 of your device, buying one software license for the added firmware and then just cloning it across your platforms. You need to be able to tie it together. It's revenue protection. Yep. But at the same time, it may also be protecting their data if it's coming back to you through the cloud. Imagine that you're a major shipping line and you've put a tracking device on each of your ISO containers. If people can find out where an ISO container is and what's in it, that gives them a way of attacking the system. In fact, a drug smuggling gang did that at the port of Rotterdam. They got into the control system and actually were able to manipulate the system to help them in their drug smuggling operations, because things hadn't been done securely. Now, there are people doing great work in this space as well. So people like ARM and Intel and Google have actually worked out how to do the kind of architecture you need to make this possible. If you look at the latest Intel chips, they've actually got this kind of capability, features built into it that will help you do this kind of thing. So it is possible. As I said, this is the good side of the story. The challenge comes in making sure that the manufacturers are A, aware of it, and B, make use of these features. They put the time and effort into actually enabling this kind of stuff so that the hardware that they're buying and procuring does actually have this kind of functionality turned on and properly configured. So there are ways of solving these kind of problems. However, you do have this issue of computational power and chip design, because a lot of them can't do good TLS, or they can't do AES for symmetric. FPGA chips, as I said, $5 more expensive if you want them to support AES. And this kind of thing costs money. Are you aware that the chip and pin cards I just mentioned in your pocket are actually designed to be EAL4+, resistant to attack? They're actually really, really sophisticated pieces of technology. But of course, the banks have reputational risks, so they're prepared to put a huge amount of money in to actually defending that kind of technology against compromise. Are IoT manufacturers doing the same? Right now, no, quite frankly. Most of them are not doing anything of the sort. The other issue you get is the fact that a lot of these things are whitelisted, or they're using common code libraries. If you look at things like webcams, there's just a few companies in the Middle East that are actually producing the vast majority of the webcams. They may look different on the outside, they might have a different manufacturer's name on the front, but there's probably only half a dozen companies in the Far East producing all of them. If you're deeply sad like me and you sometimes scroll through the CVE database, here's a particular CVE vulnerability. This is for GSOAP. GSOAP is a piece of code used for networking in things like IoT devices, providing a protocol. This protocol is currently in, I think it's 32 separate devices. If you've bought IoT devices and deployed them widely, how would you know if your product has got this vulnerability in it? Do you have a configuration database? Do you understand what kind of code, what kind of hardware sits inside your product? This is always going to be an issue. How do I know if I'm vulnerable or not to this kind of attack? Genivia, the company behind it, say that their last knowledge, 34 companies are using this. But I said those 34 companies are producing probably 90% of the world's webcams. The other risk you face, what if the manufacturer decides that the service they're operating isn't worth the money anymore? This is no longer profitable. There used to be a product called Revolve you could buy. It's like a sort of a hub that would help automate IoT processes in your home, allow them to talk to each other using the different protocols and frequencies and so on and so forth. Revolve got bought by Google, who thought this was fantastic technology. This is really good stuff. We like this. We'll buy them. Then the product didn't sell anything like the numbers that they thought of, and they came up with a better way of doing things. So what do? They just turned it off. The product in your home was dependent upon a cloud service at the back end to make it work, and Google just turned it off. The product at that point just became a brick in your home, ready for the recycle bin. What happens if you're an organization that's bought a whole bunch of products and suddenly you find the service has been turned off and you've got to go and replace them all? Yeah, this is a kind of risk that you need to be thinking about when you're procuring stuff. How dependent am I upon somebody else to provide the service to make this work? Here's another classic one, the Ycam. This is a typical web camera. It's got an app interface. Now you can look at it on your PC. It's got no internal storage. It live streams everything that it sees and sends it to a cloud backend. And when you bought the box, they promised you that you could have a week's rolling data stored on their system for life. Only they rapidly realized that this was not profitable because, of course, the number of cameras go up, the amount of storage goes up. So they sent out an email changing their terms and conditions. They gave you 14 days notice that if you wanted to continue using these things and storing the images, you would have to pay them £2.99 per month per camera. What if you were a large industrial organisation and you'd bought 30 or 40 of these things for each of your factories to provide security? Imagine that you've got a couple of thousand spread at your sites around Europe running your part of your physical security. How are you going to feel about going back to the board and saying, awfully sorry, remember those cameras we bought? I said they were a great deal. Well, they've changed the terms and conditions and I now need £5,000 a month just so we can continue to use them. What happens if somebody changes the rules underneath you? Pay up or you own a brick. Yep, because we're just going to turn your storage off. And these things, I think it was Which did some testing. We haven't looked at this one, but they wouldn't allow you to use third-party storage devices, so you couldn't send them to Dropbox or Google Drive. I'm sure that with some creative network addressing and a router, you could have intercepted the traffic and redone it. But for an organization, A, potentially, if it's in the terms and conditions you're not supposed to do that, you might be liable. And B, if you're the average customer at home, are you going to be aware that that kind of thing is possible? Probably not. But that's just one example. Do you go and ask for more money, or do you need to go and replace them with products from another vendor? All these kind of things you need to think about. These are risks that may apply to your IoT products. And then we have connected roads and vehicles. Paul was talking about this. It's increasingly difficult to buy a car that isn't connected these days. Personally, I'd much rather have one that isn't connected. Who owns the data that's generated? Yeah, what happens to it? Is it mine? If you look in the small print at most of the contracts, the car companies say, no, it's our data, not yours. It may be about you, but we own it, and we can do what we like with it. You have very little control over that data. The other challenge is, and we've worked on this one, how can a manufacturer then roll out safety critical updates over the air globally? I've got 8 million cars of some sort, Ford Mondeos or whatever they happen to be, out there. I find as a safety critical patch, can I actually roll out this kind of update? And can the processing power in the car actually cope with doing that? It's harder than you think. It's possible, firmware over the air updates, but it's harder than you think. What kind of coverage and capability do I need to do that? And what happens if I can't patch? Paul talks about issues with CAN bus. There's another problem with CAN bus. There's actually an error in the way the protocol is written such that it's possible to send a device malformed packets in such a way that it takes itself off the network. There is no way to patch that without going back and rewriting the CAN bus specification. Can you imagine that manufacturers are going to recall all their cars with CAN bus in and update not only their devices, but also what about all the firmware they bought, all the radios and all the other bits and pieces from other third parties? You'd have to redo all the firmware in the car at the same time. How likely is that to happen? What happens if that is on, say, a warship or an aeroplane or in your large factory? What if you find out that you've actually got a vulnerability in your CAN bus system that cannot be patched? And you're reliant on a connection to a third party to provide maintenance for those robots. We also need to think about the autonomous vehicles. There's lots of talk about making them self-driving, reaching level 5, where they're capable, in some cases you may not even have a steering wheel. But what information do they need to receive about their local environment? They need to get information from the road network, because you have things like traffic lights, you have lane closures. Anyone been down the A38 Aston Expressway into Birmingham? Yeah? Where they change different lanes at different times of the day. How does the autonomous vehicle know which lanes are open and which ones are closed at any given time? What about variable speed limits? You're on the motorway and the speed limit drops from 70 to 50 to 40 to whatever it is. Yeah. The car needs to know what those kind of limits are. Preferred diversions. There's a road closure. And of course, if you've got those roadworks with average speed cameras, how's it going to know? All these kind of things mean that the car has got to be able to interact with the road network. People are now planning how you build those intelligent road systems that allow that kind of thing to happen. How do you do that securely? How do you build that kind of architecture? And it's back to that point I made earlier about how does it scale? How do you roll that out across a national network? And who's going to pay for it? Who's going to pay for the fact that we want to be driving autonomous cars? That's an interesting challenge because Of course, you need the sensors, but you need to deploy technology, and then you need to try and manage and patch it. I've come up with a list of 11 questions that I think are important for anybody to ask about this kind of security. So you need to understand these things. What risks are associated with my solution? How secure does my solution need to be? How secure are the components? Have I overrun? Yeah. Oh, sorry. Well, there's the list. We need privacy by design and compliance. I'm sure this slide deck will be available. I'm sorry, I didn't even notice you holding the signs up. And the last one here, we need an end-to-end security architecture for IoT, which is something I was talking to Paul about earlier, to understand how these things link together and how we manage